Okay, guys, thank you for showing up this late at night for the penultimate event tonight, because I'm assuming most of you are going to go straight from here to the FAO Rockefeller Pavilion afterwards for the session on the different texts related to food and ag within the UNFCCC and the road to Paris, to Belém, COP30. But that's a different story. So for now, we have a very great panel lined up for a conversation on protein diversification. And I'm just going to start by introducing the panelists. Then I will do a brief introduction to the issue, and then we will hear from all the four amazing panelists here. And hopefully there'll be time for a conversation, including checking in on questions from people in the room. And I see a lot of friendly and known faces here, which is great. But I'm also hoping there's going to be some people who are not familiar to the subject and are keen on learning something from it. Yeah, you can move closer. And I'm very happy to say we have a small panel this time, because a lot of the other panels I've seen during COP has been huge, some with up to 8 people, which is not very conducive to having deeper conversations and really talking to people. So we're gonna go on until approximately 7:25 and just wrap up around then so we can move over to the other session. So with that and 4 speakers, we should have sufficient amount of time. So let me just start by introducing the panel here tonight. So over to my far left is Andile Ngumi, also known as Andy. And Andy is a South African speaker and a serial social entrepreneur working in the education sector and the intersection of food systems and climate change with vulnerable and marginalized communities. She's the founder of ROAR South Africa, a movement that empowers young people to find their voices and tools to create meaningful change in their communities. And most recently, she has founded The Source, which aims to bridge the gap between social and environmental challenges by building sustainable circular economies within local context. And there's much more to say about Andy, but I'll leave it there. And if she wants to introduce a few more things of her work when we get to the talking point, we'll do that as well. Next to Andy is Dr. Edmond Fernandes. And Dr. Edmond Fernandes is the director of the Edward and Cynthia Institute of Public Health. He's also the CEO of CDH Group. And he's a former consultant to UNISCAP in Bangkok and a US Department of State Legislative Fellow. Dr. Edmond has a Wikipedia post where there's a very, very long resume, so I'm just doing the brief one here. If you want to check out a lot of his accomplishments, you can do it there. Next up is Jean-Claude Ruboyogo, among friends known as JC, so I'm sure he's fine with people calling him JC as well. And Jean-Claude is the leader of the BEAN program and the director of the Pan-African Research Alliance at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SIAT. And JC is the leader of the BEAN program and the director of the, that's a little repetition here. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya. He holds a master's degree. He holds a master's degree in crop improvement from the University of Nottingham, UK, and is a recognized seed systems and technology transfer specialist. And he has led several SIAT PABRA research areas, including participatory variety selection, followed by targeted seed systems, reaching end users across 30 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, much more accomplishments in addition to that, which we'll get to momentarily. And finally, just next to me, we have Patty Fong. Patty Fong is the Program Director of Climate Health and Well-Being at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, also known as GAF. She brings 2 decades of experience with strategic philanthropy in climate and sustainability. She's been the Program Director at the European Climate Foundation, a major philanthropic initiative established by several global foundations. She was recruited in 2007 to help establish the foundation. She was founding COO until August 2012. In parallel, Patty led strategic development and implementation for ECF's portfolio on energy efficiency, and more recently, on building and urban systems, which includes the focus on social justice and human rights dimensions of the clean energy transitions, as well as the potential of the circular economy to systemically address the equalization resource use. That was a very long sentence. And again, that shows how accomplished Patty she is. And you will know all these faces, I'm sure, so it's great to have you all here. So let me just start by briefly setting the scene for the conversation today. So this conversation is about protein diversification. And you've heard a lot of that being addressed during this COP and in the months leading up to the COP and over the years. But a lot of those conversations are focused on particularly global north countries and trying to address the importance of reducing meat and dairy consumption in those countries. That often applies to aspects of technical solutions like alternative protein, cell-based agriculture, and so forth, and less so building the link to what the situation is in least developed countries and if there's any interconnectivity between those different aspects. So we've been working on trying to find an approach to protein diversification that takes a more nuanced perspective on things and looks at what is needed in the high-income countries, which often correlates as being the high consumption countries, and what is needed in low-income countries, the least developed countries. One of these categories, the former, has to be dealing with the aspect of lowering meat consumption overall, whereas in least developed countries, there's nutrition deficiency, as we know, and that has to be addressed as well. So the lens is around equitable food distribution. But now I see a lot of you are people I've seen in this space before, and you will know the difficulties of having this conversation, because often when you talk about the necessity to cut down on meat consumption, you are met with the notion that you're against development and you're against pastoralists and smallholder farmers. And as far as I'm concerned, that they couldn't be far further from the truth. In fact, the huge livestock production systems in the global north are directly also affecting smallholder farmers as well. So how do we break past this? How do we break into a conversation where we can really talk about equitable food distribution that has an honest conversation of the need to cut down on meat consumption for climate change, biodiversity, water use, social equity issues, and at the same time not falling into the pit of being labeled as being against pastoralists, smallholders, Maasais, and so forth. Where do we start and how do we take it forward? Can we take it forward, or is it too difficult to have those two conversations in parallel? I believe that we are able to have that conversation, and that's what we're going to be trying to do today, and really hearing from some of these experts. So, without further ado, I would like to start with Patty. So, Patty, could you talk a little bit about your stance on protein diversification and some of the relationships you might see with regenerative agriculture and agroecology, and how those two sides, the production form and what we produce, might be interlinked?
Thanks, Lasse. I think I would start with, because you mentioned equitable food distribution, I would say it's about equitable food production, equitable food distribution, equitable food consumption. It's throughout. Right, so distribution is one piece, and for Global Alliance, so for those who don't know, we're an alliance of foundations, and many work in different parts of food systems, and so very diverse in terms of our membership, but we're guided by a set of principles that help frame the discussion and make sure that we're addressing the issues systemically. And one of the questions is, even when we hone in on the whole concept of protein, it almost kind of takes it out of the social cultural dimensions by breaking it down into one aspect of nutrition, when actually we need to be looking at diets as a whole, access to whole foods, what's on the plate. It also takes it out of the context of your community, who's producing your food. So, maybe for some, there are actually those who are working with livestock or pastoralists. And so if you have this whole concept of protein and diet shifts, how does that affect your community? So I think we cannot divorce this discussion from the broader dimensions and also with culture, religion, traditions, So what actually is on your plate should be influenced by what are these various dimensions, and these needs to be also embedded in community-based discussions. And this also is rooted in this whole concept of food sovereignty as well. So this right from community level to decide what is grown, how it's grown, and actually when you start to shift power and you have the discussion at community level about what are the overall impacts, who's benefiting right now from industrial livestock, industrial crop production, who's actually losing. And we did a assessment on the food and energy nexus and looking at food systems and energy systems and how they interact, and they're interacted throughout the value chain. And who is most impacted are the producers and consumers. Who is profiting the most? Companies that are producing the inputs, external inputs that go in. Companies that are processing or ultra processing of foods that are then marketed and sold to consumers. If we start to just drill down into like one aspect of the nutrient that's on your plate, we're missing the bigger picture of the dynamics that is actually influencing the narrative. And I would say maybe even from like a global north perspective of the amount of protein that you're told should be in your diet, the amount of meat that should be in your diet, and then especially in some contexts that has been there for decades and pushing, and there's a lot of lobbying that's going to that, and we're not actually almost like distracted by taking it into a technical level. We're distracted by the bigger political dynamics in the global system, where we actually should be looking at how to be countering those forces and countering those narratives. Maybe I'll stop there, and I'm keen to kind of get into a broader discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Patty. I can see we're going to be heading into a very juicy conversation here. I like it a lot, and particularly the aspects of food sovereignty seems to be a topic that keeps coming back. So, JC, I wanted to come to you. You and I have talked a lot about the aspects of food colonialism and looking at ways of producing food as nutritious food in many varieties, in many ways, and many places around the world. And you have a lot of experience, as we just heard previously, working across almost 30 countries in Africa on traditional plant-based foods and using what is available there. Could you talk us through a little bit of your experience with that and how that might fit into the aspect of protein diversification?
Right. Thanks, moderator. Maybe I just added to his introduction. The Pan-African Bean Research Alliance, which I lead, just won the prize, Africa Food Prize 2023. So in addition to the introduction, that was in September. And the reason we managed to get and we won is the transformation of highly nutritious food, beans, from a subsistence neglected crop to high valued crop. Why do people value it? I think that's the starting point. It's the protein. Mainly, that's what people know. But of course, beans have several other nutrients. It's a superfood. It's a really tiny but mighty because it offers protein, it offers micronutrients, it has carbs, fiber, dietary fiber, which even if we eat meat, they don't have that dietary fiber. It has several other vitamins and minerals. So, and then in addition to that, just to use the example of my mom, I come from background of farming in Rwanda. The consumption of beans in Rwanda, it's maybe average 120 grams per day. In my house, I eat 3 times beans, in the morning, and lunch, and supper. So average Rwandan consume that, but it's across many East African countries. So why do that? They know very well traditionally that beans has to go with the cassava in order to get these micronutrients and proteins. It has to go with the banana. That's why they do intercrop. It has to go with the maize. So they're already aware that they cannot eat maize alone. They're already aware they cannot eat banana alone. So beans has to accompany all these commodities. That's a tradition. And my mom, when I was working with her in the farm during my young age, I'm still young, but she used to have like 28 varieties. And she knew how to plant, where to plant. She had a variety for poor soil tolerance. this part of the plot, this where I have to put this variety in order to get proteins. She knew because we are young, there are some varieties of 3 months and others of 2.5 months or 2 months. She knew that this one, I'll plant it there. The time the other one is maturing, I can get leaves, I can get a fresh grain, So she knew how to manage proteins because she knew that cassava, you may exploit it anytime. She knows very well that banana, you can cut anytime. But proteins, she had to use all this thinking, how to manage the diversification in the farms. Not only diversification in terms of crops, but also diversification in terms of varieties. So 28 varieties, not planted in the same way. That shows how farmers, all the traditional thinking, they knew how to mix. But I think what probably many people in the policy, in the research, we forgot is how do you build based on that, and then we continue strengthening rather than changing the whole food system by either subsidizing one crop and then we forget the ones which. So I think when we do to the policy and we start supporting ABCD, we give free fertilizer, free seed, and then farmers, we incentivize one, and then they don't do the rational. Otherwise, the farmers are rational. So that is one way. And this also is not only for proteins management, even agroecology. Because when you think about proteins and your food, you also know how to do intercrop, you know how to do crop rotation. So that thinking has implication on the way you manage your farm. And that's why they could do banana and beans intercrop. They could do one season maize or tuber or roots or potato, and then the other season they do beans. So they know how to do that. But again, how do we help them? I think that is the key. So in the case of the bean program I'm involved in, I'm leading, and the Pan-African Bean Research Alliance, what we're able to do is understanding them, the farmer, the consumer. And then you have what you call the corridor. We say, well, you have to understand the consumer. This is very important. The consumer is a farmer who produce, or urban consumer, or whatever. And then we go back to look at what do they want now. They are looking for short cooking time, as energy is a major issue. So we have started breeding and the variety for short cooking time. So that the consumer in urban who has energy problem can go back and buy beans from the farmer, and the farmer does not lose livelihood. So we're thinking, how do you keep a traditional crop in the hands of the consumer who is urban now? So we are looking for taste. We do also breeding with the consumers. Is that suit your taste? Yes. And then does it also increase the productivity of the farmer? Because the farmer needs incentive in terms of production, in terms of market, in terms of their own. So we work along the value chain to make sure that we don't lose the farmer interest, we don't lose the consumer interest. And they work also with the private sector to optimize these products. That's why I say, well, let me process beans to more convenient and more nutritious food, which are easy to cook, because the consumer is sensitive on time to cook, on time to also energy as well. So we make sure that these traditional crops have a different consumption patterns and different consumption products, and then keep the farmer livelihood going on. So in brief, I think that will continue allowing the farmer to have that crop, not really thinking of a kind of food sovereignty, but with the new thinking of how a global program like what we have of one CGR can keep the farmers engaged, can keep the consumer informed, and bring more protein. So we need to avoid really shifting our food diet to more of other things, but keep them at least with that plant-based protein. Yeah, that's what I can say for now. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Jay-Z. Really important points. And you also highlight the importance of looking at what kind of food production that is suitable for different regions. And within that, I liked you touched on the aspects of resilience, and within that, climate change adaptation probabilities when trying to use the crops and the production of food that has been used traditionally, and empowering that and enforcing that, working with smallholder farmers as opposed to trying to impose new food systems. Very important points. Thank you so much. Dr. Edmond Fernandes, I want to come to you now. You're based in India, and India is a very interesting place when it comes to meat and dairy consumption. Traditionally, Indians have been eating very little meat. I remember statistics some years ago, which was around 40% of Indians were vegetarian. I don't know if that holds anymore. There's been a slightly different when it comes to dairy, because there's been a huge dairy consumption. And how do you, through your work, see any changes in India now and elsewhere, of course, but I'm really interested in hearing in India. And how do you see the trajectory that it looks towards increased meat consumption? What are the dynamics at play there? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So I come from a background and I represent a community of doctors which essentially does not understand protein diversification. We are more rare in understanding the intersection of food, climate, and health. Global conversations around this does not really mean anything to the medical community, to the allied health science community, and overall the large public health community. So while consumption of meat is a big deal in India and also the South Asian markets, there is a rising consciousness for being vegan. But at the same time, this does not really bridge the gaps for hunger. This does not really bridge the gaps for addressing malnutrition. And it finally snowballs back into the conversations of health. Food as such is a determinant of life and a determinant of health. I quite agree with Patty when she said that protein as one of the components cannot be looked at a larger scale. What does this really mean for the future of food? And what does this really mean for the intersection of climate and health? We cannot really push industries or sectors to move into protein diversification, because if at an international level this stems out to be a very lucrative or favorable market, what essentially also needs to be done is a behavior change communication among last mile communities or voices that are not essentially represented at high level events. Because you cannot bring into legislation what needs to be adapted by behavior. And this presents not just scientific questions around how we really see this transformation into protein-based diets or plant-based diets, but this also needs to be looked at a larger level of what does it philosophically mean to individuals, what does it culturally mean to individuals. For that matter of fact, traditionally within the South Asian markets, there are a lot of Brahmins or Hindus who are vegetarian by nature, but there are a lot of Christians and Muslims who are non-vegetarian by nature. If I am to quote my own example, I used to be a pure non-vegetarian. It took me several years to realize that, okay, it's time to give up red meat. And mind you, I did not give up red meat out of embracing a social consciousness, but I gave up red meat because my uric acid level started going up, because my cholesterol level started going up. And there you see how health, food, taste played out for me to really make this decision. And probably if we can look at an angle where we build a rising consciousness of why we can avoid red meat, why we can look at how our health can be more organized, more balanced, and how our approach to consumption can be more meaningful, that's when we are probably going to be at a win-win situation for the diplomacy of food that we want to engage in.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Edmond. Really, really interesting perspectives, and I think it adds a good point about the nutritional value as well to this conversation. Andy, I want to come to you now. You work a lot with marginalized communities and others in South Africa, and have a lot of experience talking to people on the ground and learning what do they need. And how does that relate to the whole issue about food sovereignty, food security, and particularly around the aspects of protein diversification? Can you share some of your learnings from the ground, and maybe reflect a bit on how you see that specifically from an African perspective, South African perspective, but also more widely in context of what's been said so far?
Thank you so much, Lassie. As everyone was speaking, I was really thinking about what it looks like within the South African context. And I just went back to a story of my older brother and the social connotations around protein diversification. So my older brother, who's much older than me, 18 years older than me to be specific, and they grew up in a very poor environment, right? And every time they had beans, right? Beans was a staple, beans and pap, which is like our maize meal. I don't know how to describe pap, but it's a maize meal starch that we have in South Africa. So beans and pap every single day. He does not want to hear or see anything about beans now, right? And then if you also think about the communities that I work in, and all of the communities, meat is associated with wealth and stature. So there's a social connotation around meat is relevant to you having money. So in any context, people want to be associated with that, right? So when you get into that space and you want to say, let's bring protein diversification, this is what it can do for you, you need to understand those cultural and things that are prevalent within those communities, right? So the conversation cannot be about this is good for you, but going back to indigenous knowledge, JC mentioned earlier, how a lot of indigenous people have the knowledge and have used, my grandmother would eat beans now, right? She's like, I love this. I don't, what are you eating if I make a white sauce with whatever? She's just like, what is this, right? So being able to draw back and really have an individualistic approach to how we approach communities. The conversation has to be personalized. How do you appeal to humans, right? It's the human nature. Like Dr. Edmond mentioned, we have to be able to meet people and have that conversation, because at the end of the day, it's those personal transitions that need to take place. So I think from my work, I've really learned that being able to translate these conversations that happen here, I can't get there and say, protein diversification, guys. What is that, right? So being able to translate that in a way that is really relevant to local people. If you speak about nutrition, you speak about health. There's a saying for young boys that meaning eat meat so you can be strong. So there's those things that I need to tackle, right? Socially, to say, well, you can eat this and be strong, right? But it has to be embedded, and that the cultural and social connotations around that take longer to actually change and transition. So I think it's that level of cognizance when we speak about things that we need to bring to conversations like these and relate to people more than anything, and not concepts. How do you translate concepts to real lives and people's stories and journeys and contexts?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. And as a trained linguist, I was very happy to hear some clicks. You don't hear that often. So thanks for sharing that. There's a whole new chapter we need to discuss there. I wanted just to take a little time check here. We now have around 20 minutes left. I do really want to get into a conversation with the people who've showed up here as well. But before we open the floor for questions, I just wanted to also ask if any of the panelists want to comment on what the other panelists have said, and then we'll do some questions, and then we'll come back and do a little final comments and reflections from the panelists. Edmond.
Yeah, so I just want to float this idea as well, where there's conflicting science, where JC is promoting beans. I was just talking to him earlier before this program that there's a linkage between beans and also the rising levels of serum creatinine for especially patients with chronic kidney diseases and also those in the window period of acute kidney diseases. I mean, there's one side of science saying that yes, kidney beans, red and black beans have issues with kidney, and there's another side of science saying beans is also good for health. So where do you draw the line with all possible human intelligence at play is anybody's guess.
Thank you so much. JC, do you want to reflect on that?
Just don't also contribute. I'm thinking again, maybe I talk about beans, but I'm looking on various pulses. So there's the beans, there's the lentils, there's the cowpeas. We need to think about diversity and see what fits very well. Could be, again, I think something you haven't done much scientifically is looking on food, health, nutrition, and health. We started with the iron and zinc on legumes, on beans. We found, let's say we did a study in Rwanda looking on how the iron beans can increase the cognitive. There's now evidence that high iron beans can be translated into better hemoglobin levels in the blood. And then that also comes with the neuroemitters. It can increase cognitive capacities of students. That has been proved. But there are several other food properties we haven't done, and these are the area I think we need really scope for improvement. That's what I can say. But also we'll have to look at diversification. But also I like the point you mentioned about social behavior change and all that. Very important. So what we did, maybe an example, is that, yes, I totally agree with you. If you go to many schools in East Africa, maybe across, they may say, wow, beans, I have eaten beans every time. Why should I, when I get money, why should I eat beans? That's what they're telling me. But I say, well, that's time, the school procurement is done by headmaster. Probably they don't source one variety. They source different varieties, they put together. These varieties cook different time. They don't care how long it cooks. They jump them out of the cooking pot. You eat them, some are cooked, some are not cooked. You end up, your stomach goes on strike, you start blaming beans. But it's the preparations. Is that we also need to think, how do we prepare our products in such a way it makes sense to the consumer? And that's why we started, again, product optimization within our food technology guys. We're working together in Rwanda with the government of Rwanda, the government of Kenya, to see how the pre-cooked beans will go to the school meals. They are well cooked, so the kids don't have to say this is not cooked, and they like it. Because, again, we also work with the consumer to test our varieties. That's why now we have yellows. People say, well, when you eat yellow, no gas. So we're also working on the sugar levels within the beans and other anti-nutritional factors so that they are removed. So there's a lot of work on research which is needed to fit the consumer, and there's still a long way to go. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Patty, I want to come to you as well. And maybe you touched a lot in the beginning on the complexity of the whole conversation about protein that incorporates social and so-called socioeconomic structures and the production as well. Have you heard anything from JC, Edmond, or Andy that has enriched your perspective on this?
Well, I was just actually reflecting on the broader discussion around nutrition. And in fact, nutrition science itself is quite divisive. Most of it is funded by private sector, focused on technology solutions, and not enough money is going to the interactions of whole foods and what that provides to you in terms of nutritional benefits. Because where is profit made? It's by creating new products that can be sold to the market. So companies have an incentive to invest in showing where, there are new, let's say, products out there, and showing the, health benefits of new products. And this is quite confusing for consumers. I mean, you look at when, first it was low sugar, let's find alternatives, chemicals. Oh, fat's bad for you. Okay, let's find alternatives. Oh, it's also new chemicals. Your body can't deal with it. So these are things which consumers now, they read labels and they don't know how to interpret it anymore. And actually, we are as especially in kind of urban markets and industrialized economies, separated from where actually food comes from. We don't understand seasonality. We don't understand like what part of the animal, if you're buying meat, where it comes from. You don't even understand like, actually there are of a carrot, there's actually different colors. Tomatoes, different colors, different varieties. People don't actually, it's just food. And we're losing almost a connection with the kind of traditions, the cultures, and that's a broader social, cultural issue. We did a couple of years ago kind of deep dives into different regions to understand the food and health nexus. And there are differences, whether it's like Southeast Asia, across Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America, but some of the commonalities were concerns around westernization of diets, marketing of ultra-processed foods, and this idea of like loss of cultural erosion. Like this is really a concern by many communities that are kind of, especially in the global south, they see this trend happening. And I think for us in this kind of global discussion, we are losing that sense. We're kind of divorcing by focusing just on the science and the climate aspect of this discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you put up the hand, Andy, because I was just going to come to you. I'm not sure what you want to say, but if you had a chance to reflect on what was just mentioned by Patty now, and maybe a little bit how the aspects of engaging with marginalized communities, where you see maybe a tension between what is community-driven, what is corporately driven, and if you see that schism somehow.
I think the biggest one is that like healthy diets and nutrition has been sold to be so expensive, right? All the outlets and all the diets and everything around consuming healthy food is exclusionary expensive for everyone to access within like local communities. So when people think about me wanting to adopt these practices, it's like it's too expensive, I can't afford it, I'm not going to do it, right? So there's also that aspect of it's the marketing, it's not being able to actually focus on the nutrition, like you said, and get back to basics and things that people can actually translate. Now it's I'm just thinking of a story where we were actually I was on a diet and within a local community, and I was trying to exemplify that if I can do, we can do it together, right? So I was like, this is something that I'm practicing, and I was vegan for about 3 months at the time, and it was I was mad, right? And I was like, it's here, guys. We are growing it. It's here, and I would actively tell them, this person, I got it from this person, and this is how much it was, and also just bringing context to informal markets and informal traders, because they also had so much. It was accessible food, right? So this is healthy food, nutritious food, but because also again social connotations, they don't want to get it from there because it looks nicer if I'm carrying a Woolies bag, which is a supermarket in South Africa, right? And if you go to Woolies, you're gonna get it for 5 times the price, and this is why it's not accessible to you. So being able to say that within these communities we have these things, right? We have these things. You can get them. You can lead a healthy lifestyle. You can eat healthy and nutritious food, and it's right here within our country. Also just focusing on building those economies and those contexts to just try and fight those social connotations and what's been fed. If you can find people within township communities, but the one thing they'll have is a television. They will definitely have a television, and what is the content they consume? Half the time it's not African or from anything from their context. So that everything that they consume is so aspirational that they want to have that too, right? So it's when you think about it, it's how do we draw back? And there's so many barriers that you don't think, but until you actually live and work within those communities, then you start finding these things. So it's not as theoretical as we sometimes make it seem. It's how do we make it practical for the people in the communities.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. I want to come to the room now for questions and comments, but before I do, I just want to pose this question to the panelists for you to think about, because once we're done with the audience interactions, you're going to get 45 seconds to maximum 1 minute just to reflect on the following question. How can we address the aspects of reducing meat consumption in high-income countries without compromising nutrition needs in least developed countries? What is the role of equitable food distribution and social justice? So ponder a little bit on that, and then I'll come back to you for closing remarks on that particular question. It's a tough crowd. It's good people. So we have 6, 7, 8 minutes now for questions, and I'll ask you to be really brief, so some more people can come in. So just state your name, your affiliation, and your question, and who you're asking the question for. And I see we finally have some wildlife in Dubai. It's right here.
And hello, everyone. My name is Islam. I'm a nutritionist. I'm the founder of Sustainable Nutrition Academy. I'm honored to be here and to listen to your stories, your achievement. One of the common things I understood is that sometimes knowledge is a barrier or lack of knowledge is a complication. Jean-Claude made an example now about how the food that is not cooked properly is associated with negative outcomes. In addition, food that is not administered properly is associated with food waste. So again, we can overcome that by teaching people different recipes. We mentioning how challenging it is to separate the meat from the people, but do you think on top of the religious, the status of the general public, the focus should be on the individuals, as you were suggesting earlier? Last year in COP, people didn't understand why there was so much meat. And there was so much meat because I'm Egyptian. In our culture, when you have a guest, something important, you bring the meat. So the idea is you need to find the right balance and being capable of separating the reality of what the culture or the environment is suggesting to you with the reality of the climate change. So do you think an increase in knowledge should be the common aspect that can help us overcome this barrier? And lastly, what do you think about the role of meat consumption in health and mental health? I was doing research about microbiome and bacteria. From what I understood, the more meat is used in terms of consumption, the more you are feeding a specific kind of bacteria within your gut, which are associated to inflammation and therefore to disruption in the brain and gut axis. So
Great.
by sharing this information, can we achieve that?
Great. So maybe the first question, the cultural sensitivities around shifting meats or having less meat, could be for Andy to start with, because she was touching on that. And then the second question can be on the nutrition aspects to Dr. Fernandes. If we can just get the mic back up here, please.
I think I'll just go back to what I've actively done, and I can't say that it's going to work in every context, right? So being in that community where I was actively exemplifying that, hey, we could do this. If I can do it, and then there were like a couple of young people that started joining, and then the older people were like, but why are you doing this, right? So being able to then explain, knowledge from, if people know better, they are most likely to do better. And then there's sometimes where people are like, oh, forget that, you know, it's too late for me, and other things that they say. But for me, I've found that when people know better, they start adopting practices slowly, but then also being able to understand people's vantage points is really important, because there are cultural practices that require people to slaughter. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I can't come and tell you, because then as soon as I do that, I build a barrier between you and I, right? You're not going to listen to me. You're not going to, because I'm opposing exactly what you believe in, right? So how do we meet each other halfway? And it's going to work in different ways in different contexts. So it's being able to learn those contexts to actually do that. But I would say knowledge is the first place to start. And then if like building from there, building a level of trust, people also like are able to adapt and change from a place of trust rather than just being spoken at. So also being able to listen when you relay this information is very important.
Thanks, Andy.
Coming
Edmond?
to your second question about the linkage of climate with health, food, and meat. I mean, the writing is on the wall. If it's not uncooked meat, take for example pork, and somebody is consuming an infected pork, they're likely to develop cysticercosis disease, and that gives a heavy neurological infection. On the other hand, if you're going to eat chicken or even lean meat, for that matter, where it's not cooked or it's kept for several days and then it's refrigerated and then diarrheal disease is the next outcome of it. So, but at the same time, if we are going to do meat bashing, what we also need to realize is that look at green leafy vegetables, look at fruits. Now, how is the vendor at the end of the day going to keep it for a number of days stored, because it's not going to sell overnight? They are using chemical preservatives, again, which is affecting our health. It's just that we choose to be blind to that reality because it's vegetables end of the day. But for the vendor, he needs to keep it over a week or 2 weeks till all that vegetables are sold for him. Otherwise, he's going to post economic losses. So in that process, they're using a lot of chemicals which are otherwise hazardous to human beings. And it's not like immediate poison, but it's slow poison over a period of time where we are developing that exposure. So we need to look at collectively how the human system is being impacted by food, by preservatives, by sugar, by dairy products as a whole rather than in isolated fragments, because end of the day, the body really doesn't understand what you're doing. The slang used is few moments on your lips, forever on your hips.
Great. We're getting a lot of good expressions here. That one and the stomach strike are my two favorite ones so far. Please go ahead. Please remember to state your name and affiliation.
Shirley Lu from Provec. My question is, if meat generates a higher emission and more challenging for food securities, plus also the cost for potential public health, etc., why didn't most of the governments in the world promote more of the alternatives protein? Yeah.
So that's a big policy question. Maybe JC or Patty want to jump at that? Can we get the mic back up, please? Thanks.
Comes down to trade, economics, exports, right? For many countries, they're exporting to a market. They're incentivized through trade agreements to maximize production, increase efficiency, because for many countries, this is a big source of their GDP. And so there is a huge incentive system, not only for companies, for big kind of livestock, agribusiness, but for countries as well, because it's agricultural exports, commodities makes a big part of their economics.
I mean, in addition to the few big meat exporters, there are also many countries, they subsidize heavily in an industry that cause higher emissions, posing higher challenge in food securities, etc. So if the meat industries can get now the subsidies for creating more jobs, more challenges to the government, what should we do to shift their support, to have them support more of alternative proteins?
Thank you so much. Just a quick reply to that, and then we need to start wrapping up.
Yeah, most of the subsidies go to commodities, and I call it commodities because they're used to process or ultra-process sugar. Sugarcane is like the #1 commodity that is subsidized, right? You've got soy, you've got corn, so all of these, most of it, fruits and vegetables, very little of it is actually subsidized. So of course, it's a lot more expensive. So because this is where big food companies, they're lobbying and they want the subsidies so that they can have a cheap, stable supply of inputs that they can process and profit off and market to consumers. So there is a real need to shift the subsidies. Right now, the subsidies are used to maximize yield. They're not based around what's the healthiest food that we can produce with our food system. That is not the kind of measure. We talk about maximizing yield of crops overall as if like foods is one single commodity. And we're not talking about diversity of crops, diversity of nutrition, and impacts on livelihoods at all. That is not a priority of governments, really. I mean, livelihoods they can say, but it's really going to big agribusiness in the country and not to smallholders. So, and it's because they don't have power to be engaging and with their government officials. They don't have a seat at the table to be influencing the policy decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I just look at also two ways on that question. I think one is the political. Of course, there's the trade, there's all that between governments, and also second one, the consumers are also voters. So you don't want it to touch on their consumption. But I think for me to reverse is starting with the consumers and inform them that yes, what we are eating has implication on climate, on all that. Because there's a study which just reached 2020, which said that on the scale of gas emission from various commodities, beef on the scale of 100 is almost a 99. But for legumes, you just 2%, right? You can see a difference of beef, dairy, compared to pulses. So again, we need to go to the consumer. We need to inform, but also need to develop a product which the consumer can also feel, because they eat what they like, not just what is given. Yeah.
Okay, just before you come in, Edmond, maybe build it into your final remark if you want that, because we have only like 45 seconds for each person now. I need to wrap up. So if you do Edmond, Andy, Jay-Z, and back to Patty.
So this boils down to planetary health, where we are looking at ensuring animals and everyone are factored in. So if human beings are looking at conversations where we look at alternative protein diversification, what are we trying to feed for animals later on? And I mean, are you trying to even feed alternative plant-based food to animals? Or are you going to keep them hungry? So the conversation around meat and carbon emission is going to continue, because although we as human beings might want to transition, how are we looking at a transition for animals? I have 3 dogs at home. What do I give them? Beans? No, it's not going to work. They're going to be on strike. Lastly, it boils down to also the survival of the fittest. So we need to relook at how are we trying to shape global conversations and policies that take everybody along the way. In terms of subsidies, in my country, in India, we also pay food tax. So forget about subsidies. Whatever we purchase is also taxed. I think in the larger scheme of things, this calls for greater reflection on food, health, agriculture, and the consequences of life as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmond. Andy?
I think to transition anything, you need a multi-stakeholder approach to it. So how do you ensure that everyone is sold out to doing this thing and transitioning to better practices? Everyone is going to have their different lanes and different roles to play within that system. But how do you ensure that, because like I said, media also has a role to play. That's something that is indirect to what we're speaking about, but it has a big role to play in how people actually consume food. So it's like being able to gather together and actually I think work together in different ways to at the end really achieve what we want to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. JC?
Right, yes, maybe just to conclude that knowing that the alternative proteins from pulses, that means a range of all these legumes which are edible, they are very good for human consumption, they are very good for planet. So based on that, I think what we need to do is the demystification of the product from these legumes in such a way that is not just thinking is the low pyramid food, low bottom, and then as we increase our incomes, we put them aside. I think what we need to do is to make sure that they're also on our agenda, those who have incomes, and is it possible, we can develop the products. We have already developed the products which are good for the upper market consumption as well, but at the same time, make sure they're affordable to those who don't have money. That's very important to buy meat every day. And I think for us, we have research products. We need to invest in our research further. I totally agree. But we have research products to support these consumers as well, as we develop better products, better varieties, which are climate as well, climate positive. Yeah.
Thanks, JC. And final word for Patty?
Well, I would agree with Andy that we need multi-stakeholder approach. We need a multi-lever approach. We need those who are working directly with consumers, even citizens, right? Not just consumers, right? They have rights. We need people who are working with producers, large and small. We need to be targeting government policies. We need to be, all of these need to be working. The thing is, are we aligned in like direction of travel? Doesn't mean exactly, but making sure that we're not conflicting with whatever specific policy asks, that they should be somehow complementary and really trying to shift overall the food systems.
Thank you so much, Patty. So in 1 second, I'm going to run to the Rockefeller Pavilion where we're going to have a next session start, and you're all invited to come there if you want to talk about the process to COP30 in Brazil. But for now, thank you so much to Andy, Edmond, JC, and Patty for all your wise words, and I think this is the beginning of a longer conversation. Thank you.